So we just scanned those guys, and I have some of the scans on here already. And we scanned them just for posterity using image capture. Um, we scanned, that's what we used on the computer that actually has the scanner next to it. Okay, so I'm going to open these up in Photoshop. Let me get rid of the rest of these things that we did last class. So for most of them, will be fine to just bring into Illustrator as is. Like this one, I'm just going to crop it and save it. Again, the scanner could have cropped it. And when I'm cropping this, in order for it to be seamless when we get it to Illustrator, I want to make sure that I'm not picking up any of the flower on the edge. I want just whole flowers all the way through it, right? Because then it'll tile nicely. So we kind of want to split the difference between these rows of flowers. It actually is crooked. It is a little tiny bit crooked. So before I crop it, I'm going to drag out a guide, and then I'm going to rotate it, I think, or I'll crop it down a bit closer first, and then I will get it precise. Come on. Oh, we need to, it's on the background layer, so I'm just double clicking on the background layer to unlock it, and now we can do Control T, and we can make sure that our guides are like going through the center and that all of the flowers look straight. I just have to move it the tiniest amount. But now we can crop it down from that. And we probably don't even need this many flowers at all. We could do this with one flower or with 4 flowers. But there might be some variance in these, like subtle differences between them that might actually add some interest to the pattern. So when we save this, we can just save it as a JPEG. We don't have to save the Photoshop file. We can hit OK. So let's try bringing that into Illustrator before we move on. No, we need Finder. There we go. So I'm going to just drop it in there. And right now, if I go to Object Pattern Make, it's going to yell at me, right? It's going to say, patterns cannot contain linked objects. Please embed the object and try again. Who knows what button we have to hit in order to embed an object? Where does it live? At least when I'm in, yeah, at least when I'm in layout. I don't know where it lives otherwise, but you can hit embed. Yeah, so now we have it embedded, and we can go to Objects, Pattern Make again, and it should be fine. There. We've got like a tiny bit of a lineup happening, but this is totally acceptable for getting the idea across, especially if it's just in like a flat. So now we could grab this and apply that pattern. Yeah. I think the quality gets so low on these though sometimes. That looks a little better actually. So let's do another one. That one was fairly straightforward, but oh no. So we are going to do this guy because this is going to have more problems getting lined up. Okay, for some of these, you're just going to, especially if you scan it, like there's not going to be a color difference across it, where if you photographed a piece of fabric, you get kind of like shadows across it, almost guaranteed there's going to be some color difference, where this, like, we could just crop this and define it as a pattern. We could do this. It would have some seams in it though, some fairly obvious seams. So if I hit enter and then I go to edit, define pattern, because we're in Photoshop, I can go to file new and make a bigger page. And fill it with that pattern, just to check it out. So that's going to layer, new fill layer pattern. And you guys can see how much of a seam there is here. So we're gonna try to eliminate some of this. And to do that, we need to use filter other offsets. What's nice before we go to filter other offset is to just write down or kind of take a note of how many pixels wide it is, but I used to make people do math to do this, and you don't exactly have to do math. You can kind of guesstimate. But if we go to image, image size, and we change this to pixels, it's about 850 or 900 pixels wide. So when we go to filter other offsets, and first let's change this to 0. So this is what it looks like normally, and then as you add pixels, it's going to start wrapping around. So that's what offset does, right? And we can change how it is affected. So now it's being offset and it's just showing the background. But we want it to wrap around, and then we have the whole image on there. We just are putting the seam in the middle. So can you guys see this seam? It's subtle, but now we have a seam in the center. Yes, Kelsey? Yes. All right, so we're gonna do the same thing for left to right. We want to adjust this until we see the seam in the center, and here it is. You can see it. Now, the one thing, now we're going to adjust this so that it looks more seamless. So there we go. And the one thing that you don't want to do is touch anything on the sides, right? Because then it wouldn't be seamless anymore. Right now, all of the edges are like this edge perfectly lines up with this edge. It's a straight repeat, and we don't want to affect anything on the edges, right? If we took a brush and went in and drew this line down the side and then defined it as a pattern, we would have a big line in the middle, right? I can do this all day long. I can add these dot motifs to my pattern if I wanted to, if I wanted this snakeskin polka dot pattern. As soon as I go and touch the edge, it's kind of ruined. Here, we'll put a few on the edge. Do one down here and here and over here. Now if we define it and choose on this page our new pattern, we have all of these broken areas here, right? So that's why you can't touch the edge of the pattern when you're making it. So let's get rid of all these dots because that's not what we're doing anyway. So I'm going to use edit fill in order to fix this. But first I want to demonstrate kind of what edit fill is meant for, which is if you were doing a fashion photo shoot, but the background was visible, backdrop was visible. Like if there are, that one's almost right, like this. If we wanted her to be in empty space instead of surrounded by all of this stuff, so just copy image, file new. If we just like tried to paint over it, right, we would lose kind of this nice gradient and this nice texture that the background has. So instead, we use Edit Fill, and this is pretty much what it's designed for. I can select this whole guy. Maybe even I'll select this at the same time. And we can choose Edit, Fill. I don't know, that's kind of a big area I chose, but I think it'll be okay. And in this fill panel, we don't want to choose background color or foreground color. That would just fill that area with the color that's in your palette over here. We want to choose content aware. It has lots of other options, but content aware is the one where it's doing this kind of good figuring out of what the background should be. There, bam. And see, it kept the gradient over here and everything. So I'm going to undo it. This is what it's did look like, and we actually missed a tiny bit here. And then we can go to Edit, Fill, and choose Content Aware, and hit OK. And now she's all alone. So we are going to use that to our advantage to get rid of this seam. So I'm going to choose kind of this cross shape, and notice I'm getting kind of as close to the edge pixels as possible without actually touching the edge pixel. And I'm choosing this cross because I'm going around my seam, right? So you can see the kind of seam in there. So now we can go to Edit Fill, and we can hit OK. There, not much of a seam. This might still have kind of like a lineup, right? Like, this has a lot of density in this upper right-hand corner and not a lot of density in the rest of it. So something that I would do before moving on is probably use the clone tool to spread out some of this dense area to the rest of the, whoops, wrong way, to the rest of the page. So this is still, this corner is still dense. If we defined it as a pattern right now, we'll change it. That's the old one, and this new one should look better, and it does, but it still is kind of splotchy, right? So we can grab the clone tool back here, this guy, and who remembers what the clone tool does? Yeah. It can like copy pixels from certain areas. So I hold Alt to define it, and I'm going to click in this kind of dense area, and then I'm going to start spreading it out. It looks like it's got, this is subtle, but it's got kind of a fuzzy edge on it, which is fine, and it looks okay, but I might want to raise the hardness a little bit, maybe not to the full 100%, but just to get rid of, it's pretty subtle, but there's like a fuzz there. Anyway, yeah, see now there's a bit less fuzz going on. So I'm just kind of spreading out some of this. If I want to move I have to keep picking where I want to be copying from. So wherever I want to draw, I have to click here first and then move it. I might get some of this like medium size and give that like a nice transition layer in there. You could also just use the clone tool and not use fill to like get rid of your seam line too. So here, we'll see how this looks. Edit, define pattern. And then back on our large preview one, I just have to choose the new pattern I defined. So it doesn't look much difference, but it's slightly less splotchy. This is all detail work. You can see the difference between these. But that is how I would do it. The rest of these images that I scanned all turned into repeating patterns really well, kind of instantaneously. Where's Finder? So when I went to play with this guy, it just like, it looked so good so quickly. I didn't have to do much at all to this. I just cropped it. And it defined really well, and came into Illustrator really well. So let's go to File, Save, and we'll save these JPEGs. And we'll bring them into Illustrator. Okay. So we'll grab these last two. Come on, there we go. And we have to embed them before we define them as patterns. Embed, because otherwise they're, oops, I clicked the wrong one. Otherwise they're still linked to the rest of the page, or to the file on the desktop or whatever. And then we can go objects, pattern, make. It's gorgeous. Object, pattern, make. So this one, it still does have a seam, but it's so subtle, the seam right here. But it, like, from far away it looks fine, so I said it was done. And we could apply it to these. Now, you are required to do color for this project. So doing color while you go, like making sure that everything's filled while you're building it, is really good. But you're also required to display different colorways, and I just wanted to demonstrate how I would do that really quick, especially if I had another texture in there. So I'm going to copy that for a second, actually. So this is what I would do if I had a, so this, all right, I just wanted that swatch in my swatch panel over here, so I copied and pasted this guy, but I don't actually need him. So if I had my front and back skirt over here, and oh, this guy got big. And if this skirt was yellow, but it was filled with my new swatch, and we just go to right-click, transform, scale to scale things, uncheck transform objects, and this is one that I forget all the time. It's also good to uncheck scale, transform, and effects. Otherwise, when I scale this down, its stroke on the outside will also get real small. I don't know if any of you guys have run into that. But it's good to uncheck that. Oh, so now we can actually do it, sorry. Oh, it's not working. Ugh. That's annoying. All right, we'll make it a jean skirt, fine. So if you have this jean skirt, and let me get in here, and it's got a yellow band and a jean skirt, how would we display the colorways for these? Because the way I ended up deciding that you guys should display your different colorways is not to recolor your whole artwork, which would be an option. Why can't I click on this? Okay, that would definitely be an option, but it's unnecessary. I would do something like this, where if this is my first colorway for this shirt, then these are my other two colorways the options that it comes in. Okay, so it would look something like this for each garment, or at least each outfit. You could make it even clearer what's happening by including your first colorway here. So if we have the sleeves yellow and the shirt blue, bodice blue, then in this one the shirt or the sleeves would be this lighter pink. Maybe I can make it even lighter. And the bodice would be this darker pink. Same here, this dark green would be the sleeves. That's kind of how it would be laid out anyway. Or that was my thoughts on how to do it. If you would like to recolor your artwork and you could figure out a good way for that to be laid out on the page, that would be fine. But this is how I would do it for solid colored things. And then back to my jean skirt dilemma, how do we display different colors of jeans where we've taken the time to get this texture on it, although it's not, there we go. It's not the same texture, there we go. We've taken the time to get this texture on it. The way I would display this colorway is to grab my squares. I guess I can copy these. I'm just alt-clicking and dragging to copy instantly, so I'll copy 3 of them. I would definitely put my denim in this first one, and this would be the same yellow. Oops, there we go. But for these, I mean, this is straightforward. We could pick whatever color we wanted the waistband to be. But for these, I'm going to recommend something a little bit different. So if I put the jean texture in there, I am then going to duplicate these. So edit, copy, and then edit, paste in front. So now I can choose my colors. So if I want this to be purple denim, I can choose maybe burgundy denim and choose that color, and I could choose, you know, green and orange or whatever. And now we're going to play with the transparency settings. So we are familiar with transparency settings in Photoshop at the very least. We know how those work. But transparency settings are available in Illustrator, and we can find them under Window Transparency. They live nowhere else. This is the only place to find them, where in Photoshop they are literally everywhere all the time. But normal, and we can go to our favorite, multiply. So now we have an orange denim, and normal, multiply, and we have a burgundy denim. So that's an option. It seems like maybe multiply isn't working that well there. Hue? Hue maybe? Hue. Yeah, hue. Hue. There we go. Right? Does that make sense? All I did was make another, so we can even overlap these to demonstrate what's happening further. I made another square that is the color that I wanted, and then I futzed with its transparency settings so that it will change my swatch color. Okay. We are gonna switch gears here a tiny bit. Last week we talked about this stuff last week, the using symbols, but now we're going to talk about emulating fabrics with graphic styles, gradients, and gradient meshes. So we're going to start with graphic styles. So I'm actually going to come back here. If I wanted, yeah, maybe we'll stick with the denim. If I wanted everything to be this denim color, I have the option, and maybe if I also wanted the stroke to be 1 point exactly, and maybe I also want the stroke on all of my flats to be purple for whatever reason, we'll change it to the strokes in front, and then we'll choose purple or rip pink. Okay, maybe I want that. Maybe I also want a drop shadow on everything. Effect, stylize, drop shadow. Looks good. All of those things would have to be individually applied to each object, you know what I'm saying? And that can kind of be unwieldy. Like I would have to go over to each object and choose that swatch and then choose the right color, you know, make sure these things are in the right order when I'm choosing those swatches, and then apply the drop shadow. And Illustrator has provided a way to make that more straightforward. So if I take this shape and I found my graphic styles panel, it's under Window, Graphic Styles, we can choose New over here or just drag it in, you know, like we do. New graphic style. And you can see this new symbol in here has jeans on it, and it has a drop shadow. We can't see the color of the line, but when we apply it to these other ones, we instantly have all of those settings. I don't know if this is something that you really would end up needing to integrate into your workflow, but it's definitely an option. And I can't see needing to save a library of all of these things, but it's also an option. One other thing, this texture is very large on here, and when I apply it, like even if I adjust this one, transform, that's sheer, cancel, transform scale, and even if I adjust the pattern so it's nice and small on this one, when I apply it to other guys, it's going to be really large again, right? It doesn't like save the scale that you've chosen across the board. So with styles, that's solved. So if I delete this one that I made, and we can save this new style in here. When we apply it, it will be that same size, which is very nice. So I don't know. That is an option for you guys. Does that make sense? Graphic styles. Yes. Yes, Kelsey. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to talk about gradients. Let me get this back to white, I guess. So I know I have never successfully used a gradient in front of you guys, but I figured it out for today. And I made this three-dimensional ball-looking object with a gradient, using a gradient. And I thought that we could make a pearl. We could make a little three-dimensional pearl that you could use as a symbol just to practice our gradients, okay? So I'll shrink this guy down. We'll start with the pearl large, and we can always make it much smaller. One problem is if we were to make a pearl necklace, you can see I was experimenting with it here. So like I would want to make the pearl into a brush. It doesn't like gradients. The brush hates gradients. So we can't do that, unfortunately. You could make a really simplified pearl like I did, or I was trying to demonstrate there. But we could easily save this as a symbol and kind of, you know, place them as needed, or like maybe they're like applique all over the dress or whatever. Okay, so we will drag out a circle. We don't have to spend very long on this, and I will make it a solid color for starters, and we'll choose kind of a ruddy pearl color, something like that, something where we can still see the gradient. Okay, with this selected, we can choose the gradient tool, and we could come over here and choose from the various types of gradients. Okay, so I can choose a linear gradient where it's just going to go left to right, or I can choose a radial gradient. So I've already made a mistake. This is pretty typical. The gradients, like I'm going to redo it for a second. When we go in here, this is how we change the colors. So I can double click on this slider. It doesn't let me start from the color that it was originally, which which is lame. So I actually saved that color as a swatch during last class, so I can adjust it there. You guys can see, can you see how kind of blue this still is? It's because this guy is blue, and what's happening here is kind of subtle, but this side is actually not white, but it's transparent, so its opacity is at 0. So if I raise this up to 100, we can still see that full blue. So I'm going to change it to white because we actually don't want this guy to be transparent. And also it should be radial. And it's going to start in the center, but as long as we are on our gradient tool, we can click and drag on the gradient until it is like where our light source is coming from. You can do other stuff with this. You can futz with, is it an oval shape that's reflecting, or is it larger or smaller? But this it's a pretty quick way of making a ball look three-dimensional. Anyway, there we go. So now we could define this as a symbol or something if we wanted to, like this guy. That was mine from last time. So you could place those wherever you wanted. This one looks shinier. Okay. How does that apply to fashion, Kelsey? Well, there are some jeans, or maybe you wanted to illustrate jeans, that are kind of dip-dyed, right? So maybe you wanted like the bottoms of them to be darker. We can choose a gradient, maybe just a linear one, right, from dark to light, and grab, with this selected, grab the gradient tool, and we can click and drag and define how long the gradient is. God, do I have to click on it first and then I can click and drag? There we go. So we can do that on both sides. Maybe using the eyedropper tool would grab it. Oh, it's like funky and backwards. So we will drag it out. There we go. So we can now copy and paste these two guys, edit, copy, edit, paste in front. And if we fill those with our jean texture, transform, scale it down just a little bit. Maybe more like 50. We're going to use our transparency settings again and change this to multiply. So now we get that gradient coming through and it's affecting the jean. Okay. Does that make sense how I use that? I just put the transparency settings. We can also use linear gradients like we've discussed to kind of like make gold belt buckles look shiny and stuff like that. Gold is a very difficult color. I would probably I would probably try to find a tone that I liked for the gold. Gold is tricky because not only is it shiny, but gold comes in like a variety of different tones. Like you can have pinkier golds, and you can have more reddish or more, whitish golds. But I'd probably save this as a swatch first. And then I could start making my own gradients. So in here, probably click on it. Oh, it hates me. Okay. I can affect how, like where the center of the gradient is, how much of the gradient is dedicated to which color, but I can also add these little sliders. So we've got the white one in the center, and that's okay, but I want one over here. And then I can double click on it and choose my gold color. Same thing for this. I can choose my gold color. There we go. So you can do You can do that. You could make it a really sharp shine. You could make it a really long shine. You could make it extra long. But giving an object a shine is a great way to convey that it's metal without going crazy trying to pick between yellows. Okay. Everyone get gradients? Does that all make sense? Okay. So we are now going to talk about gradient meshes. These are really cool, really handy. So you know how jeans often are like white in the center or like lighter colored in the center of your thighs, right? And then they're darker on the sides. We're going to try to emulate that here using gradient mesh. Before I do, I am going to demonstrate it on another shape really quick. So if I grabbed the pen tool and drew kind of a pearish shape, I guess. If we wanted to make this shape, this terrible shape, look three-dimensional, we would have a hard time with that because it's so... We couldn't do it with the gradient, at least, like I just did with the sphere, because this has more going on. It's got more lumps to it. So instead, we're going to use gradient mesh. Let me start with a solid color. And gradient mesh doesn't work if your object is filled with whites, and I guess I'll explain why in a second. But with it filled with a color, that's key. You can go to Object, Create Gradient Mesh. And it makes a mesh based on this grid that it defines. So I can choose from more or less rows. Excuse me. So maybe more like 3 rows, right? And we can choose from more or less columns. Maybe we want maybe we want 1 more column actually. And then we are going to be able to adjust these moments in order we could really spread out the shine here. You can also choose from, it automatically will load on flat, so when you first do this, it'll look like nothing has happened. I don't know why this is an option, but it is. So you have to choose to center to get the lightness in the center, or to edge gets the lightness in the edge. And then you can also change how light the highlight is. So it's getting to pure white in the center of mine, pretty much, because it's essentially at 100. But if you wanted, you could make it duller. But we'll leave it at 100 just to demonstrate. What else? Yeah, okay, we're gonna do it again. So now I could click in here and adjust. Maybe we want it to deal with more of it at the top and be actually pretty dark in the center. Or maybe we want the center of the sheen to run more along the right side. It's up to you how you adjust these, but it's very adjustable how this gradient functions. So it doesn't work well on a pair of pants that hasn't been split. Let me show you. If we always need to start the pants basically at black or potentially a very dark gray. I'll come back. I'll try one with a gray next. So if we start with black and our pants are connected, what's going to happen when we go to Object, Create Gradient Mesh, is it gets hung up on the crotch, and it puts all of the lightness in the crotch. So we have to split the pants first, and I also just wanted to show you how precisely I can split pants. So I'm going to use the Pathfinder tools to split these, and I need to draw a pen line that has no fill on it for it to work. Oops. Let me deselect. So my pen, I'm going to start outside and I can click to start, and then where it's going to start splitting, I can click and I can be very precise. Come down here, come down here. And so because I was able to like click exactly on those points, I can select that and that. And I know it will split exactly. We're going to do that again in a minute, but just for now. Okay, ungroup them. Arrange, send. Okay. So with them split, going to Objects, Create Gradient Mesh, we get kind of a nice spread. Maybe more like 2 columns and 3 rows is good for this. But you notice it went to blue. First off, it goes from white to blue, which if we were to put something on top of it, like that was using multiply, it wouldn't pick up any of that blue at all. So we need to start on a black, and I also want to copy it first. So if I have already made it into a mesh and I copy and paste it, there doesn't seem to be any way to like turn it back to a normal shape. It's now always going to have that mesh stuff associated with it, which is like fine, I guess, but it's not acting normal. Like I can't adjust to the stroke up here. It's just acting super weird. So we want to copy it first. So before I apply the mesh, because you are basically making it into a mesh, like the live trace or the live paint tool makes it into live paint and basically only a live paint object. This kind of stuff should be done at the last minute, like the last things that you do. So edit copy, and we'll just leave it on our clipboard for now and we'll paste it at the end. So with this starting as a black fill, we can go Object, Create Gradient Mesh, and hit OK. And we have this nice gradient happening that fits our shape, which is nice. And then we can go to Edit, Paste in Front, because I had that guy on my clipboard. And when we fill this with jeans and then adjust to the transparency settings, it is going to look pretty nice. So transparency settings and multiply. Here we go. So on this side, I'll do it with a dark gray so you can see this kind of fades into pure black on the edge, and maybe you want it to just be a lighter jean. So we can choose like one of these darker grays instead and copy it. Objects, Create Gradient Mesh, and then edit, paste, and fill it with the jean and adjust its transparency settings to multiply. Also, I adjusted the scale. But you can see more of the jean texture on the edge of it on that one. So that's just those two slightly different colors, so you can get an idea of that. So that's pretty straightforward, and that's almost everything I want to talk about, I think. But I did want to show you how nice it is for fashion illustration, especially anything where we have this kind of curve of the body, or we want the gradient to fit to these curves. We can do that really easily with the gradient mesh. So I'm going to lock my croquis layer here. I know we don't talk a lot about fashion illustration in this class, but it is, I don't know, something we can touch on now and again, I think. So I'm again going to split this using the divide function. So I need a pen line that has no fill on it. And then I can start drawing. And I start drawing outside, and I can start drawing kind of anywhere outside. And then I click where I want my real line to begin, splitting it, something right there. And then I can even give this a little bit of a curve to show, you know, a little bit of a crotch. And then Alt, make that a corner, and I can click down here. So now all that's going to be left when we select this line and the pants and choose divide, all that's going to be left is this little line, and it will have split it. So now we can go to Object, Ungroup. Okay, that's how I split things. So with this in kind of a dark gray, we can go to Objects, Create Gradient Mesh. Actually, let's copy it first. All right, now it's on my clipboard. Object, Create Gradient Mesh on one side, and we probably want more rows than that this time. And probably another column. But you don't want to go too crazy in any of these things, because it gets unwieldy. You don't want like 20 rows. And we'll do the same over here. And then if we like, we can adjust some of these moments. So I can kind of try to bring the center of the lightness up to her thigh. In a lot of pants, at least like a few years ago, it was like all these pants were like white on your thigh, and then they were like completely black on the calves, almost like a super dark blue, and you just look so two-toned. But we're kind of going to imitate that just for a demonstration. Yeah, so that looks okay. What you'll notice when you're moving these around here, if I bring, so this guy, this anchor point has a handle here, right, and a handle here. And if those two handles start like overlapping, like if I move this anchor point up too far, you start getting hard lines instead of like a really easy transition. I can just lower the size of the anchor points, I mean the handles. The smaller the handles are, the smoother the transition. Anyway, so this looks okay. And we could, I mean, I could futz with this stuff for hours, but we can at some point here paste the other side, or paste what I copied earlier, which was the original. So File, or Edit Paste, Edit Paste in place. And we'll make these jeans, and then we will adjust the transparency settings. So multiply. So now this is a nice subtle gradient, but it actually looks really pretty good. Let me just scale that texture down. All right. If you wanted to make these jeans, what color should I make them? Shout out a color. Orange. If I wanted to make these jeans orange, I'm just kind of going to review. We went over how to do this here. We can easily do that by pasting it again or whatever. Edit, paste in front. I don't know what happens. Sorry. Edit. All right, there's both of them. We can choose the orange or whatever. Yeah, that orange is good. And then we can play with this transparency setting. So transparency and then hue worked well on the last one, but I don't know, multiply or any of these can be what you want, just depending on what you want. But there you go. You have some weird orange jeans. I really like them, actually. They're like a burnt color. Yeah, and then you could make that little swatch pretty easily using the same techniques. So Does that all make sense? We went over how to make swatches using scanned fabrics, and then we went over how to emulate some fabrics with gradients and gradient meshes and graphic styles. Okay, so that can be really handy for adding some depth to your flats. You don't have to go crazy, but specifically like these jeans, when you buy jeans that are, you know, that have whiskers on them, like someone put those, not like cat, but like these, you know, someone put those on there. No one wore them until they had whiskers on them. So like when you're buying new jeans, probably someone designed a flat that had all of this data on it. Like where exactly are you going to place these whiskers, and like how frayed do we want the edge of the jean? I can send you guys videos. It's crazy how they distress jeans for us. There's so much extra work that goes into it. But wearing raw denim kind of sucks. So I don't know, it's a balance. Anyway, I think that's good. Cool. Thank you guys. So we can take a break until 3:30, I guess, and then we'll come back, and I would love for you guys to